Hi, my name is Joe Pfeiffer and I'm a NetBackup product manager here at Symantec. I'd like to spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the features and capabilities we have for backing up Microsoft SQL servers. So to do this, let's just talk about some of the options and how you configure them, and actually more importantly, why you would choose one option over another for backing up SQL, since there is a tremendous number of options within NetBackup. So to start, let's just take, at the center of our picture here, our SQL server that we're actually backing up. Now there's another piece to this environment, which is usually going to be your NetBackup server. So the NetBackup media server, as you know, does the processing and actually does that actual backup and sends it off to some sort of storage location. Now, in terms of looking at how you want to do the recovery on this, a good way to lay out what options you may want to do for protecting SQL is to look at what your recovery requirements are, because designing your backup around what your recovery purpose is a much more intelligent way to design your backup environment. So for this scenario, let's just rank these things on a basis of shorter, RPO, and RTO to larger. So at the top of the scale here, we'll have a small recovery point or recovery time objective, and at the bottom we'll have a large scale. So the best option that we can give people is, if you want a really, really short RPO or RTO, you can use clustering. So you can use storage foundation high availability, and this is really a solution that is even beyond backups because it prevents stuff from going down in the first place. So at the top of the chain, we highly recommend you look at storage foundation high availability for SQL, so that you don't even have to do backups or scheduling or any sort of thing in terms of just keeping that application highly available. Now the next step down would be to look at a feature within NetBackup called instant recovery. Now instant recovery is really a term that we give for having NetBackup manage and control the snapshot process on some sort of storage. So your SQL environment here, to use instant recovery, would have to go out and be managed on some sort of centralized storage. Now that storage could be something like, say, storage foundation. It could be an actual hardware array that has snapshot capability, but it is something that can be snapshotted. So what instant recovery does is it takes a snapshot of that data so that you have a second, third, or an additional copy, and then when that primary data may fail, what you can do is just revert to that second copy that you took. So in this whole process, NetBackup is cataloging and imaging and looking at all the things going on here, but the actual storage of it is very quick because it happens at the storage level. So in this situation, again, you would be using storage foundation. You may be using some of the snapshot hardware providers or software providers, but this is very quick because when it comes time for recovery, you don't actually have to look at anything inside the snapshot. So you don't have to be concerned with what files, databases, or anything's there, because you're just reverting that volume to the primary copy. So that's what instant recovery is about. Now the next step down here in our RPO-RTO story would be to look at something called off-host backup. Now off-host backup is a little bit different use case than this instant recovery. When you're doing this instant recovery, there's actually no agent processing going on the SQL side other than quiescing and pausing SQL and taking the snapshot. It doesn't actually have to go through and process individual items here. When you do an off-host backup, it's not necessarily about instant recovery through snapshots, but actually processing that backup. So in this situation, you'd be sending data off directly to a NetBackup host. So you have your primary data here, and you can mount this on your NetBackup host and then send that data off to an additional location. So perhaps that location is something like tape or disk, but this backup processing now, then, rather than going through the SQL server, through NetBackup, and out to the tape device, you can just take that snapshot, mount it on here, and you eliminate the burden of having SQL process the backup, because it just takes the snapshot, breaks it, and then mounts it on the NetBackup server. The NetBackup server spends its time processing and indexing that backup as it's sent off to the storage location. When it comes time for recovery here, you can recover directly through the NetBackup server, and you have the ability to restore individual items or smaller level groups than, say, the instant recovery, which is more about a shorter RPO or RTO. And then the final option here would be to just use a native SQL agent. If you use a native SQL agent, rather than taking a snapshot and mounting it here, you eliminate this and you actually take the backup directly through the SQL server and out through the NetBackup media server out to storage. So in this situation, you don't necessarily eliminate the burden of having SQL not have to do that backup, but it's the most simple in terms of just placing an agent on there. You don't have to use any sort of snapshot technology. You don't have to do any of the more complex configuration to get that very short RPO or RTO. So those are just a number of options that you can use for protecting SQL.